Welcome to this section, where we'll explore the various storage solutions available for EC2 instances. To begin with, one of the most critical options is the Elastic Block Store, EBS volumes. Let's clarify what they entail. An EBS volume acts as a network-based drive that you can attach to your instances while they are operational. You may not have realized it, but we've been utilizing EBS volumes seamlessly in our operations. The primary advantage of EBS volumes is their ability to retain data even after an instance is terminated. This functionality is incredibly valuable, as it allows us to recreate an instance later and mount it back to the same EBS volume. Consequently, all of our data can be retrieved just as it was before. Furthermore, it's essential to note that at the cloud control plane level, each EBS volume can only be attached to a single instance at any given time. When you set up an EBS volume, it is tied to a specific availability zone, which means you cannot attach an EBS volume created in EU East 1A to a different zone, such as EU East 1B. We'll visualize this with a diagram shortly. Now, how can you better conceptualize EBS volumes? Think of them as network-based USB flash drives. Similar to how you would insert a USB stick into one computer and then transfer it to another, EBS volumes are linked through the network without any physical connection to the machines. As part of your AWS account, you get 30 GBs of free EBS storage every month, whether it's general-purpose SSDs or magnetic volumes. In this course, we'll specifically work with GP2 and GP3 volumes, which are part of this offering. Let's take a closer look. EBS volumes function as network drives, which are not physical disks. The communication between an instance and an EBS volume relies entirely on the network, meaning there could be some latency as the system communicates across different servers. On the positive side, because EBS volumes can be viewed as network drives, they can be swiftly detached from one EC2 instance and attached to another. This flexibility is particularly beneficial during failover processes, for instance. Remember, EBS volumes are restricted to specific availability zones. As mentioned earlier, if an EBS volume is created in EU East 1A, it remains locked to that zone and cannot be attached to an instance located in a different availability zone. By understanding EBS volumes and their capabilities, you're better equipped to manage data effectively in your cloud environment. In this section, we'll explore how performing a snapshot allows us to transfer a volume between different availability zones. To begin with, it's essential to understand that since we're dealing with volumes, you must provision your storage capacity in advance. This means you need to specify how much storage space in gigabytes you require ahead of time, as well as the IOPS, which stands for input/output operations per second. This helps dictate the performance characteristics of your Elastic Block Store, EBS volume. You will incur a charge for this provision capacity, but keep in mind that you have the flexibility to increase this capacity over time. This is particularly useful if you expect a need for enhanced performance or larger storage. So, how does this all come together in a diagram? Picture this. We have one EC2 instance located in the US East 1A availability zone, which can be linked to a specific EBS volume. If you decide to launch another EC2 instance, remember that an EBS volume cannot be simultaneously attached to more than one instance, adhering to the basics covered in the Certified Cloud Practitioner level. Consequently, it's crucial for the second EC2 instance to have its own dedicated EBS volume. However, it's worth noting that you can attach multiple EBS volumes to a single EC2 instance. You could visualize this setup as having two USB drives connected to a single computer, quite a reasonable configuration. Moving on to availability zones, it's important to highlight that EBS volumes are tied to specific availability zones. Our previous examples have been based on US East 1A. If you desire additional EBS volumes in a different availability zone, you would need to create those separately in the new zone. In the same way that EC2 instances are linked to an availability zone, so too are EBS volumes. Another significant feature of EBS volumes is the ability to create them without immediately attaching them to an EC2 instance. This on-demand attachment capability adds a layer of flexibility, allowing you to utilize volumes when required without a permanent connection to an instance. Lastly, when we move forward with creating EBS volumes in conjunction with EC2 instances, there's a critical attribute that often comes up in exams: the delete on termination option. This detail is found in the console interface when you're setting up an EBS volume alongside an EC2 instance. Specifically, it appears as the second to last column during this process, and understanding its implications is vital for your AWS knowledge. By default, the option to delete on termination is activated for the root volume, while this option is disabled for any newly attached EBS volumes. This setting plays a critical role in determining the behavior of EBS, Elastic Block Store, volumes when an EC2 instance is terminated. As we observe, the root EBS volume is designed to be deleted automatically when the associated instance is terminated, which is why this option is enabled by default. Conversely, any additional EBS volumes linked to the instance do not get deleted, as their setting is off by default. However, as you can see in the user interface, we have the flexibility to either enable or disable this delete on termination feature for any EBS volume. A practical use case for this setting is if you wish to retain the root volume after an instance is terminated. For instance, there may be valuable data stored on the volume that you want to keep. In such a scenario, simply disabling the delete on termination option for the root volume will ensure that the data is preserved even after the instance is no longer running. This knowledge could also be useful in exam situations where understanding the impact of these settings can be pivotal. I hope you find this information useful and relevant to your understanding of EBS volumes in AWS. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.